Hi, welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, I'm a programmer at TIFF now, and this is the other thing I do. This is episode 500. If you can believe that, I'm not sure I can. And my guest for this very special Semcast is Sara Canning, an actor you'll know from dozens of things. On TV, she's had regular gigs on The Vampire Diaries, Primeval New World, Remedy, and Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events. On the big screen, you've seen her in Hello Destroyer and Prodigals and War for the Planet of the Apes and Level 16 and the Shudder films Superhost and Influencer. Now, in addition to her role in Christian Sparks' rural drama Sweetland, Sara can be seen opposite Jonas Chernick in Sean Garrity's new film The Burning Season, which rolls backwards through the history of two unhappy lovers to reveal the dark secret that binds them together. It's opening at the Varsity Cinemas in Toronto this Friday, May 10th, and you should see it. Sara picked Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene, Sean Durkin's powerful 2011 debut starring Elizabeth Olsen as a young woman who comes to live with her older sister and brother-in-law, played by Sarah Paulson and Hugh Dancy, after escaping the cult that's controlled her every thought for the past 2 years. Contrasting the past and present versions of Olsen's character, as she begins to work through a traumatic experience she barely understands that she's had, it's a powerfully claustrophobic drama that plays like a thriller, and a hell of a breakout for both director and star. No wonder Sara picked it. This is Someone Else's Movie.
It's always sort of floating in the back of my mind, particularly when I'm writing and aiming to direct something soon. And, you know, the stories that I've written are not at all similar to Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene, but there is something about Sean Durkin's ability to create atmosphere that just gets under one's skin, my skin anyway, that I would love to be able to, you know, try my own hand at as a writer director. And also just as an actor, I appreciate the performances so much. But I remember I didn't see the film at TIFF. I saw Southcliffe at TIFF, which was really exciting. And I didn't realize I was getting myself into like a 4-hour extravaganza and thought, oh, I might have to leave halfway through this, and couldn't get out of my seat. But I saw it soon after after it premiered, Sundance and then TIFF. And I remember going with my friend and we just looked at each other after the film, and like, you know, it's still kind of dark and you just sort of see the outline of her face. And I could tell we were both going, you know, so it's just really stuck with me over the years. And I've watched it many times, and I think I actually have a different experience of the film each time I watch it as well.
It is something, right? Like, I mean, it is, I remember seeing it and remember that ending and thinking, oh, people are going to hate this. And in fact, like, people got up and were buzzing about what does it mean? I don't know what's going on. It's like, that's the whole point, dude. Like, this is about someone who is haunted.
Absolutely. I love the ending. And you're so right. I think people, I've read anyway, that people can be quick to say, what was the point? And like you say, that's the whole point. That is the point. And everything about the ending. I mean, I could look at the ending on a psychological level and just sort of go, oh, when will she be free of this? This chat is basically just going to be a lot of me making the sound. You know, I could look at it on that level. Part of me looks at it on a realistic level, and I'm like terrified that, you know, her sister and brother-in-law are about to be completely disposed of so that she can be hauled off back to, you know, wherever they are upstate. And I just think it's so beautiful in its ambiguity. And I think the look on Elizabeth Olsen's face is also just so perfect, because even yesterday I was rewatching and almost like an inch from the screen going, what is going on your face here? It's beautiful. I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. And to think like this was, I went back and read my review, checked it over from 2011, and I do, in fact, do the thing where just, you know, if the name is familiar, it's because she's Mary Kate and Ashley's sister. Like, and they have been utterly left out of the conversation subsequently, right? I mean, she is not another Olsen child. She is an actor who has sisters who were young child actors.
Totally.
But the powerhouse of her performance and Durkin's debut, really, and just the fact that this wasn't her first feature, but it was her first lead, and she just owns it so fully. Mm-hmm. But the range that she shows and the way that Durkin calibrates it in the chronology, because we don't get a straight line. We're watching someone just start to comprehend that they have PTSD, and that means understanding the T. Like, that means figuring out what the trauma is. Mm-hmm. And it is so expertly delivered, but it's also so elegantly presented that the more I think about it, every time I watch it, I'm looking for the clues in John Hawkes, right? Like, I'm waiting for him to do something sketchy, and he never really does, because he's walking the line so well. And he's an actor who, I guess we saw it in Winter's Bone as well, but he is someone who has just got this innately kind presence. And when you cast him against that type, it's terrifying, because you want him to be the guy you think he is. We know he is. Like, he's a decent human being who just has a bit of a skinny look to him. And instantly here, he's like a Manson-esque aesthetic, or an ascetic rather, who's just fully committed to whatever this bizarro lifestyle is. And yeah, he just won't let you go.
Oh, I totally agree with you. And I think it makes when we first see that really stomach turning sexual assault, it almost feels like a bigger betrayal because of how he's portraying this character. And I was actually talking with someone about it today. She asked, she's never seen the film, and she asked, is it disturbing? And I said, yes, I would call it unsettling. And then there are some moments that feel really like, oh God, how did we get here as the audience? Because there's no real, because of, the sort of cutting back and forth and the ethereal nature of, this present and that present, there's no real lead up to that moment of first, like, oh, she's in real danger here and she's being assaulted, and it's just kind of come out of nowhere. It just feels all the more, I think, amazingly too, and the way that the film is pieced together, that can be how trauma presents itself, which I think is so smart. Like, it's not like, oh, there are a lot of, here's a huge threshold that we're crossing over and I'm about to be hit with a really terrible memory, but that there's just something about this moment in time that opens the portal to this awful thing that happened. I just think it's really smart that way.
Yeah, the editorial structure is, well, elegant is one word. It's also assaultive, right? Because we can't control her memories any better than she can. So when something crashes into her, we get pulled into it. And it's similar, it's something Durkin does really well with texture, where he'll use silence against the audience. He does it in The Nest really beautifully too. And Southcliffe too opens with that long silent walking sequence, if I'm remembering it correctly.
Yes.
But that's dug into my head.
I think he does that with silence. And I think there's also something that he does with these, like, just kind of, I really notice it with how he presents environments. And oh my God, that moment when Martha is leaving at the beginning, which is so clever because she leaves in the midst of seemingly real peace. I feel so lulled by the beginning of the film. It's like you're saying, that sort of how he uses silence and how he uses, texture. And there's such a soft quality about the beginning of the film. It's like, oh, look at this really idyllic farm where these people are just playing with each other's hair and sharing food. And oh, it's a bit weird that the men eat first, but it's, you're just kind of presented with this, like, oh, a lot of the noise of the world has just been eliminated. And then we see her sneaking off in the middle of what feels like a really peaceful existence. But there's this great tracking shot as she's, just kind of tiptoeing along the front, the porch kind of area. And then we see, oh my gosh, that she's so good, Julia Garner.
Yeah. who I don't think I'd seen in anything at that point. She was completely
Yeah.
new to me. And that alien quality she had when she was a kid, also perfect casting for this.
Perfect.
Just,
And she's just standing in the window. And he just has such an ability to take like something quite mundane. She's not even like, standing in the window in the way that we might see someone standing in the window of a horror film. It's
right.
not that kind of contrived, but it's just her stepping forward to catch Martha leaving with this tracking shot. And I'm like horrified, like absolutely terrified for her life. And I think he really does have I find the film very hypnotic in that way too. Like, I think you're absolutely right with the use of silence. And that was a very long tangent to say that sometimes he does this thing with, someone standing in a window and there will be these like like you're suddenly pulling back, and in the middle of the shot, which might be 20, 30 seconds, halfway through, I sort of go, oh, I'm suddenly concerned. And I just think there's something that's so skillful. And I think I'm interested, like I said earlier, I'm really interested in being able to, I don't want to use the word manipulate, but being able to do that without music is really something, because I think music is often used to sort of go, okay, we're gonna lead you here, and I totally understand that, and I don't think he has to do that so much.
No, he holds takes long enough that you start looking for the thing he wants you to see.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's in the Iron Claw, it's in the Nest, it's in this. Southcliffe, it's all about feeling that the threat is just outside the frame. I guess
Yes.
with Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene, the worst thing about it, the most unpleasant thing about it is that the threat is right there and smiling, right? Like there's no, it's all implication. It's all learned menace. I mean, there is drugging, there is sexual assault, there is an absolute nightmare. But unless I'm misremembering, it's been a couple of years since I saw it last. This all came together, and I apologize very quickly. But the only violence we see on screen, if I'm remembering correctly, is when Martha kicks her brother-in-law. Like she acts out against him, reflexively.
That and the stabbing.
The stabbing,
which you don't expect to happen.
Right,
and John Hawkes doesn't do himself. Patrick doesn't carry out himself.
Right. Yes, he doesn't.
Which is even weirder but yes, then the kick down the stairs, which is incredible, and just like, oh, it's such a great, straw that breaks the camel's back. Really, I think, like you say, like this learned menace thing. I think what really I've come to understand over the years that I find so effective about this film is that I think many of us are, fascinated by cults and people, everybody always wants to talk about the latest cult thing. Everybody's always like, have you watched this HBO documentary on this cult? Like everybody's always talking about the latest cult thing. Many of us know people who have been, and I read an interview with Sean Durkin where he talked about the things he'd read, but also that he ended up having a friend who talked to him about, I think it had only been a few weeks since she'd sort of extricated herself from a situation that she went, oh, think this is a cult. I think what I find amazing about this film is that it feels the most authentic in terms of how this might happen to someone.
Yeah.
I've always felt like a real, just like a stomach ache for her when she's actually with her sister. Oh my God, Sarah Paulson, just incredible any day of the week, any time of the year, but beautiful in this film. And I think really trying her best in her own limited ways. But you just get a real sense of an arrested development, because I was reminded when I just watched, right, like their mother died when her sister Lucy has gone to college, and Martha is sort of left to deal with a weird aunt that they don't get too much into, but there's a weird aunt, and there's a real abandonment thing. And, this promise of family, I think is so universal. I think many people find themselves in this real place of yearning about family, about their own families, whatever the circumstances. And watching this film, I go, uh-huh. And that is how it happens. And that is how this family has presented itself, about talking about how, and I love too that I think she's just, when I watch the character, whether in the past or present, I kind of, because I've been writing and, taken writing classes where and as an actor too, of going, what does this character want? What do they want? I watch her and I go, I think she's just trying to find out how to be in the world.
Yeah.
Even to figure out what belonging means.
Yeah, I think you're right. There is a neediness in her early scenes, chronologically, I mean, that she's listening, she's watching, she wants to belong. And yeah, clearly, I mean, the other thing about Olsen is she looks a good 5 years younger than she really is, at least in any given shot. And so you do feel like whatever she's experienced, it hasn't shaped her yet, right? Like she's taken in a lot, but she doesn't know who she is. She doesn't know who she wants to be, and to be that completely alone. And so shockingly to lose a parent when you're however young she was, of course she'd look for something else. And that's how cults perpetuate themselves, right? They always, nobody ever talks about, I mean, the 40-year-olds who get sucked into cults end up being, like the people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th. They're people who become anti-vaxxers over Facebook, but they have established lives. Martha doesn't have anything to ground her. And so when she sees a family structure that she finds appealing, and of course, everybody's showering her with affection and attention, and they all think she's great. My wife, and I'm sure I brought this up on the podcast before, Kate has a theory that the reason teenage girls love the Twilight books is because Bella is a blank slate on which they can project themselves and watch this character be embraced by everyone at high school and then become the love object for two very handsome men and all of this other, well, technically men, older, like werewolf boy and 100-year-old vampire. But but it's the same sort of fulfillment fantasy, right? Like where you're accepted for who you are and everybody thinks you're cool before you even do anything. And it's brilliant in terms of bringing insecure people into the readership of this book, where it's ultimately fairly harmless. I mean, there's some ideas about gender roles and marriage that I deeply disturb me, but we can get into that in the Twilight episode of this podcast, which will hopefully never happen. But if you listen to what Patrick is saying to John Hawkes' character, he's not saying anything. He's just babbling affirmations and reflecting whatever it is that somebody says back at them with his, his unblinking gaze and his soft voice, and just telling them not what they want to hear, but what they've just said, and amplifying it in a way that is seductive. And the thing about the script that's so brilliant is that Durkin did decide, as you were saying, he was fascinated by cults, but he wanted to leave the ideology out. So we don't understand what it is anybody wants except power, which is ultimately what all cults are about. So he's just reduced the signal to noise, and we get the seduction and the attention, and you become the focus of this incredible person. Isn't that validation enough? That's how Bella and Edward work. And Twilight the movie had come out 4 or 5 years before this, the book a couple of years before that. And I did wonder, I've never been able to ask Durkin, I've never had the chance, but I'd love to know what he thinks of that, because it does feel very much like his answer to the Twilight movies, that someone is being welcomed into a family that she doesn't fully understand, and that they see her as food, but they're trying really hard not to eat her. And here they eat, like they want to eat her. They want to consume her until she is nothing but another cell in this organism. And that's what's so scary about Patrick, is that he is absolutely friendly and open and welcome and wants to listen to your story right up until he gets bored with you.
Right. Or the second you present any kind of challenge to the way that he's shaped this thing that they do. And it's really well structured, I think, too, in seeing that sort of power dynamic actually is passed. It's like filtered, it's titrated to the women in terms of how they then present the next young woman, and how I think they use the term handling. You should handle her, which is like such a great word. It's such a great, awful word of like, okay, and now, because it's grooming, really. It's kind of like, okay, now we're going to present this next young woman as, we're going to kind of take her through the ritual of cleansing, which is actually rape and, being indoctrinated. And you're so right. Like, I think it was very wise to actually take any specific religious ideology off the table. I think we get a glimpse of like piles of books in his room, and I kind of want to just like pause and try to, like with a magnifying glass, go, okay, like which philosophers have you spun to make this make sense? Because I'm always curious, can't help it, always curious about patient zero, or, why, what was missing from his life that he's doing this? Like,
Right.
Was there a partner? Was it just like, because I think we all know, or I don't know, maybe some of us know the origin stories of people like Charlie Manson, and of just going, yeah, what was that childhood? And is there something that happens in the brain that just makes that person go, okay, I can actually step outside of this enough to look for people who've had similar childhoods, and I can, grasp that. It's just really, I just kind of go, right, what is the click in the brain that goes, I need to now use this to my advantage?
Right.
Because I don't think many people get there. I think people, like, we watch Martha just try to navigate it and be really confused about what's happened to her at all. But somehow I just don't think that, any well-adjusted person goes, I'm going to gather together a bunch of people who are about 20 years younger than me, and we're going to have a farm, and I'm going to control them in this. I'm going to keep them and handle them. I just don't think anyone who hasn't had strange things happen to them does that.
Hey, it's Norm, interrupting my own show to bring you up to speed on Shiny Things, my newsletter about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming project. Last week, I wrote about the Criterion Collection's Blu-ray release of Nancy Savoca's Dogfight, which rescues a personal favorite from obscurity and gives it the special edition it's long deserved. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io or find a link at the Semcast Blue Sky account. You like reading about movies? I like writing about them. Come check it out. My theory, honestly, is that this is his thing. Like, he figured something out that works, and he's just stuck to it. I honestly don't think there's anything more to Patrick than that, because you see it in, like, Hawks is a good enough actor that you can see this guy is actually improvising. That he's very serene, he's very still, and then his eyes will flicker when he gets trapped, or when he traps himself. There's one moment, I think, it's the second time, the second time we see him, where somebody asks him a question and he doesn't know the answer right off the top of his head. And he just has this stutter and then figures it out. But it's the first crack in the armor that we get to see. And it's the reverse for Martha, because she's being pulled in and we get this little moment of being ahead of her. It's the only time it happens, because everything else that happens is surprising and horrifying. But we're still, like, Durkin gives us the space editorially to make our own judgment of this guy as she meets him. And there's that little tiny moment where it's just like, oh, you're not, whatever it is that you're going to do, and we know it's not good, it's going to be really bad, and it's going to come from his weakness. Yes. And his fear of being trapped. And I think the most frightening thing about a person like that is that there is no origin story. It's just the thing he figured out that works, right? That's so much worse, isn't it?
Yeah, no, you're right. It is.
Like, Manson was a failed rock star, And he found a way to turn his charisma into something else. And there's all the other personal non-starters in his life, the things that didn't work out for him that he channeled into this. Plus, he had the exact right time in the 60s. The Summer of Love had curdled already, and he was massing people for some. I mean, it's always a race war, too. Let's not forget that. There's always a race war.
Yes. Which is, when you put it that way, it's like, can't you look at the present time and go, it's always going to be the right time? Yeah. It's certainly not becoming less of the right time, with people feeling really disenfranchised with the way of the world. And, just from every angle, the state of affairs, the state of the world, and also the amount of distraction. And I think the default to sort of not connect, that if something is presented as like, come on, we're going to write songs about you. And, we're all really just going to be so insular and live together in this way. I think it's just another sort of piece of evidence of going, and this is how it happens. This is how people fall into this kind of thing. Because I think a lot of, if you take it sort of into a broader view of people, I think a lot of people with the political landscape right now are probably going, I'm being told what to do anyway, in ways that I'm really not interested in. Seems to be the case with bumper stickers that I see, and everything we see on the news about the US every single day, that I kind of go, oh yeah, it was timely in the 60s. And I think it is only going to present itself more and more. I thought of something as you were talking about John Hawke's performance, which is so fantastic. And I think about this when I think about the burning season, because I think, I'm sure they knew that the structure of the script was going to be moving between timeframes, unless the script is sort of just shot chronologically and then it's like, surprise, we just cut it all up and mix it all up. I think the intent with this film was to present this kind of timeline. I think it really requires I think of it as patience on the actors' parts as well, of like what is being seen when, because that felt one of the most often asked questions about the burning season when we've been at film festivals is like, did you shoot it chronologically? And our director, Sean Garrity, likes to talk about how he made the first day of his life hell and insisted, yes, we are going to try to do as much of that as we can. But because the film is working backwards, it was interesting to consider, okay, we are acting this in a specific order, but also thinking about how things will be received when it's viewed backwards. It's just, I think it's like a specific kind of special consideration for actors who are in films that are in these kind of fluid, timelines, that not that we need to be thinking like ever, like how is an audience perceiving this, but that the breadcrumbs kind of change.
Yeah, well, I mean, you find the scene on the day, right? Like you don't know what the scene's really about until you shoot it, and then with the editing again, it's another discovery. I guess for people listening, was it shot chronologically, or did it ultimately just become, we have this location, we shoot it today?
It was mostly chronological, except for the epilogue, which is it was the prologue. Right. It's actually the prologue, with the younger versions of Elena and JB. That was, because we had to, like, very big spoiler, burn something big, and so the logistics of that.
It's called the burning season. I mean, it's assumed.
Yeah. There's some literal burning in it, folks. But I just remember thinking, like really making a blueprint of, and, sometimes talking with Jonas as well, which is great, as he's also the writer, of going, okay, like, how are we really mapping this out? And because we had chapters, Sean, the director, and I had a lot of fun with the fact that we had both named the chapters. Like, we had chapters 1 through 7, but we had both shown up with our own subtitles for each chapter. And we would like sort of philosophize about why why did you call this chapter this, and why did you? And yeah, it's just I think it's always fun to kind of consider, even though they're very different films, but I didn't even realize until we started talking about it. It's like, yeah, the timelines really play a major part of how each film is viewed. And I think because we keep hearing, Jonas has heard a couple times, like, we really thought your character was an asshole at the beginning. I've also done a play that required a great Canadian playwright named Hannah Moskowitz that there was a lot of, weirdly, Jonas has also done the play, but in a different production of the play, that it really required what I saw as like a new level of pacing and patience in terms of how I'm meeting that live audience, or how a film audience might be meeting this particular character in the burning season, if that makes sense.
It does. I mean, I saw a couple of different versions of it fairly early on because Jonas asked me to just be an advisor on it before I ended up getting this programming job, which would have made that incredibly unethical. But it is fascinating how on second viewing you can't pretend to be in the shoes of someone who's never seen it before, because it's actually designed to play on that and to sort of watch. I mean, it begs a second viewing no matter what, because you want to see, if a film like this is successful, you're going to want to see, like Memento, you run right back to make sure everything fits together the way you think it does.
Totally.
And here it's like, not only does it create a consistent portrait emotionally, but it also, you are learning things about these people from their future in a way that you shouldn't be, because it goes against all the basics of narrative, which is that you go through the journey with someone, and here you're going the other way, but you're actually watching the armor get built in reverse. And if you're watching that, then you're also watching the armor come off piece by piece to see the place they started from. And that part on second viewing was really fascinating, just the way that they're not defensive, but they have defense mechanisms that only the other understands. And so the more time you spend with them going backwards, the more you see them stop trusting anyone else in the world, right? Like they started that, they had that. If we're going forward, it's just not as interesting as going backwards in this case for that story.
Right. And the way that Jonas puts it, which I really appreciate too, is to really use structure as a look at the nature of a secret and the way that a secret works, and that a secret can really take on a pretty wild life of its own. And I think a lot of us experience, perhaps my face betrays that, like, it's been really wild in life sometimes to go like, oh my God, that turned into that over a decade. Like, and that's really kind of the same as looking at that time frame. That's what's a little bit different, I think, about Martha, Marcy, Marlene. Take a deep breath every time I say the title, because with each viewing, I actually, even though it's, probably typically a couple years in between, I don't think I ever really hang on to what leads us into what. Like, I have a good idea. Like, I remember the film, and I remember, where each storyline goes of sort of like, oh, this storyline culminates in her kicking poor Hugh Dancy down the stairs. And then this storyline culminates in the stabbing, and then her, really having a hard time dealing with it, and Patrick confronting her kind of really aggressively about get over it. And, death is a beautiful thing. And we're all sort of existing, he has this whole story about fear being the purest emotion because it eliminates everything else, and this and
the
that.
Liberator.
And yes, exactly. And, I remember how each story culminates, but I find when I'm watching it, every time I go, oh, Oh, and this time I noticed far more than I remember about what the tiny cues are that pull her memory.
Mm-hmm.
And I can never see coming, I can never see it coming, like where we're going in her memory, which I think, but I think it's in a skillful way. I don't think it all makes sense to me in terms of, oh, okay, yeah, I can see how your brain would be led from this moment in the present. Or maybe I'm just like more than willing to go on, because like I said, I just find it so hypnotic that I just go along on the ride.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. It's almost an environmental tick, right? Like you're pulled, we're pulled with her, but it is like there's this amorphous boundary,
Hmm.
fungible boundary. I don't even know how you describe it, but it makes memory so real, or his, like Durkin's strategy is to make the memories so real that they just take over the story that we're in. And it's not like someone walking through a door, or the camera gliding along through a scene transition. It just happens. We're just suddenly there.
Hmm.
And it's obvious, right? Like it's not like she's dressed the same. There's no stylization, but I think the fact that it is so mundane that we're just
Yes.
in another shot,
Yeah.
and the film's pace hasn't changed and the music isn't telling us anything. You're just drifting into the new memory. And when it's truly traumatic, it just doesn't. The other thing that I really admire about it is that it doesn't stop. She's never
Mm-hmm.
jolted out. It just, again, you get to the end of the thing and then
Hmm.
we're out of that. And that's even worse because, it's like you've been thrown free of a car, and you're
Hmm.
moving, the car stops, and she is still going and emotionally carrying that into her present day, which is again something that Guy Pearce says in Memento. Lenny actually has a little bit in his voiceover that says, you're angry but you don't remember why, you're just still angry, you're just moving forward angry.
Hmm.
And that's not the emotion she's got. It's more of a trauma state, which is actually worse because the frame feels oppressive. The threats everywhere and nowhere. And all we know is that she still feels that way when she's back at home with her sister. That that isn't stopping for her.
Oh, it's such a great way of putting it. And I think you're absolutely right about the slipping in and out, that we don't get a sense of like, okay, I'm going to go back to living my life now. I'm out, even when she's managing to have moments of levity on the boat or whatever, it feels like she's not quite,
Like it's a performance, right?
yeah, it's like hovering above the reality of what's happening. And you get a real sense of how exhausting that type of trauma state must be, and just how all encompassing. And I know that I've read some people's frustrations with, but is there really a change for her at the end of the film? Because I often look for that as well. I go, okay, what has been transformed, what needs to be transformed, in each scene, like what are the mini moments, and what, where are we at the end of the film? But
Mm.
I I actually think there is something to the fact that she's almost returned. It's like the hero has returned to the real world in some sense and gone, but this is not the kingdom for me either.
Yeah.
Like, I think some things have been confirmed for her in the real world, which maybe weren't before she found herself in this cult family on a farm. But I think there's like some real growing up that happens. And I don't think it's easy. I don't think there are any easy answers for her. I think that's the thing I find most heartbreaking about the film, is that the people that it feels like, oh, okay, it's going to be okay because now she's back, she's with these people, and it feels almost in moments like as volatile, as more so in some ways, because there's not the well, maybe there's some manipulation, not the same kind of manipulation that she was experiencing, but I think there's new knowledge that she leaves the film with. And I would be really curious to see I mean, I know we all like, as much as I like the ending, I go, yeah, I want to see the next week of her life. No matter what happens, no matter if she's dropped off at the place that her sister Lucy has looked up that they're bringing her to. We found a very nice place. I think they just refer to it as that. Or if if the cult brother behind them is real, or if it really is all in her imagination. Like, I'm just really curious about what she does with this new knowledge about the real world, the sort of real, more tangible family world that she's returned to and gone, okay, I and of course a lot of that is because of this state that she's in, but I think, yeah, I think there's just some uncomfortable things that she's learned.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she traded one family for another, really, on the most basic level, and this doesn't work for her either.
Yeah.
Her defenses are still up. And the other thing, too, that Olsen gets, I don't even know that Durkin has it in there, but Olsen plays it, and Paulson, too. They each know how to push each other's buttons the way that people who've known each other their whole lives do. But with sisters, there's no, like with brothers, I have a younger brother, and there's always, or there was when we were kids, there was always fighting. Like, you could actually fight it out if you needed to. It was stupid and impulsive and short-lived, but with sisters, there's no possibility of catharsis, at least not as presented this way. They are just, stabbing each other with little tiny stilettos that they've been holding for their whole lives, and they can't help it. They don't mean to. But the emotional violence is so powerful. And that exchange, like, we're going to send you to a home while you're a terrible mother, like, just the back and forth of it is, they spit it out at each other with such venom. And all I took away from that, and Hugh Dancy has a moment too. Ted has a moment where he says, like, I don't know how to deal with this, where they are acknowledging they're not the right people to help her. Like, she needs to be deprogrammed, and this isn't it. Mm-hmm. And she can't articulate it, and neither can they, and they certainly can't tell her. She won't listen. And so there is this absolute misery that they create for themselves as this family unit, where she is sleeping all the time, but she's angry all the time, but they can't explain to each other what's going on. They can't use their words because she won't hear it, and they're terrified of offending her and triggering her. And she doesn't understand that she can be triggered, and all of that is in the film. It's all the texture, it's the air they're breathing, but they can't have that conversation. The one thing that might actually make them a family would be her admitting she needs help and them offering it.
Yeah.
They go to rage instead.
They go to rage and miscommunication. And I don't have siblings, but I have certainly witnessed exactly what you're talking about with sisters, and just thinking, will this ever be faced head on? But then when it is faced head on, I mean, it's not really in a constructive way either, in my experience. And I think that's what's so good about the film, is that it's dealing with subject matter that could very easily find itself in a horror film. And yet it's this very sensitive drama. And it deals with things like, you like to think that you're mothering me, but you never did. And you're going to be a terrible mother. And like, that's what's scary about the film. I think it's always my favorite thing to watch about performance and actors, and of just like and good scene partners too. Like, what are the ways that these actors are willing to hurt each other, in order to make us love the whole thing even more. And I just think all of these actors are really, really beautiful at that. And including the family, the cult family. Oh my God, Christopher Abbott.
I was just about to say, we haven't even brought up Christopher Abbott or Brady Corbett.
Oh my God, these just like, getting to see them before they become these like indie film powerhouses, and seeing it, you can see it in all of them, of like what's to come for. It's just, yeah, it's really beautiful. I get really excited about that when I watch this film. There's such there's such nuance in it. No one's kind of going for the big, but it's directed in a really nuanced way. No one's kind of going for the obvious, I don't think.
Yeah, no, it's like a quintessential Sundance movie, right? It's all about character and it's all about moments. And then you just step back a tiny bit and there's this horrifying thing that's been laid out for you so elegantly and squeezing your throat like you can't breathe. By the end of that last shot, I remember just sitting there in absolute like full attention, rigid in my seat. Like, what is going to happen? And then the credits are rolling. You're like, oh yeah,
Yeah. And
that's
you're
what
right,
I wanted.
no music, just the car sounds, just them talking off screen about like, who's this idiot in the middle of the road, and not being able to see what's
Yeah.
in the road, and then you just kind of see the flash of the guy run behind her in the vehicle, and it's like, oh my god, yeah, it's just, yeah, he's really masterful at that kind of suspense because it's unusual.
Yeah, it's mundane, right? Like there is no threat unless you want there to be, or unless you perceive one. And if that's the case, then if there is a threat and we were right to see it, then that means Martha is right and has been this whole time. And they've been dismissing her because they can't understand what she's been through. And we've been through it with her, so we sort of get it. But whether it's real or not, that's how she's going to respond for the foreseeable anyway. I mean, who knows how long she'll be like this if she doesn't get the help she needs. And hopefully, my ideal ending is, yeah, we get another week of her in rehab, just trying to deprogramming rehab, trying to figure out what happened. But we know, so it's unnecessary for the purposes of the audience.
Yeah.
But yeah, and if she's not, then she's just going to be panicked and haunted. And if she's right, then there's no answer. There's no release. There's no ending.
I know. I know.
Oh, it's a hell of a thing. I was going to ask, did you see the short? I have yet to see the short film.
I have seen the short. I think because I have the DVD at home, and I think the short is on the DVD. I haven't seen it in a long time. And it's great. It's really great. But I'm so glad that he got to really lean into. I don't find it as hypnotic as the feature because, of course, a short film has a lot to do in a shorter amount of time, and we need to kind of get across. It's like this guy sort of getting one of the girls like out in the world, and we don't really see that in the film. So in a cool way, the short acts as a springboard, I think, for what we're left to just kind of assume and infer and kind of go, like, what are these guys doing when they're picking up these young women? Like, how are they approaching them? And I kind of love that about the film, that we are just left, like you say, we're left in the car with her at the end. We're left on the farm. She even says at one point, near the beginning, she's talking to Christopher Abbott's character and says, where do they go every night? Like, they get in that vehicle and they drive off. And we're left to kind of feel really trapped there with her as well. Of like, I'm left here to sweep off the steps, just, maybe wash some pots. But this is what we do in order to feel wanted by people, I guess. I mean, it is like a weird microcosm of, we all do things to feel like we belong with people. I mean, the second that people always say, like, the whole blood is thicker than water thing, but it's like, once you move beyond we're family, therefore that's that, we create all of these pseudo sort of, well, like this family dynamic, we create all sorts of dynamics in our lives where we go, okay, because I do this, I gain this, or I benefit from this group of people this way. It's just, hopefully it doesn't get out of hand.
Yeah, no, I mean, as soon as she's there, she starts, not only do they change her name and tell her what to do, but they demand, without ever saying so directly, they demand that she be of value, right? Like, she has to contribute. And that ultimately ends up just being a sex object for Patrick, although they never say it as such, but that's his ultimate goal for literally every woman, as we see over and over.
Yeah.
Like she's just the latest in a cycle.
Yeah.
And then the thing that breaks her out of it at the very end is hearing the name she used to have come out of someone else's mouth, right? Like that's only then does she realize how fully she's been replaced and what that really means and how disposable it makes her feel. And it's all on Olsen's. I mean, it's the beauty of the script that we all get there together. But that's the thing we're not ahead of, like that realization. We're right there with her. And Olsen is she's got this incredible wide open countenance where all of a sudden you just see all the hope die. And we didn't even know there was hope there. Why would there be? She's talking to the cult, but she wants to be affirmed, right? Like she wants it to be, she wants to know that they miss her.
Yes.
And just that wordless moment. It's so good. And it's so awful to every time. Like it physically hurts me to watch that. I think that's why I haven't gone back to it for a bit.
Yeah, I know. It really is beautiful. Like you say, you kind of almost don't know that there is hope there. And that's what I think of when it really feels like this young woman trying to even determine what her lens is on life and what it means to be in the world. And they keep at the farm, they keep saying to her, people are meant to just exist. And it's like, I mean, sure, we can get into that to some Buddhist extent, sure, but there is so much. That's not what these people are doing. They may say they're just existing, but that's not true. And it's not, I think she's having a hard time with that because I think she really is trying to figure out what it is to be in the world and be beholden to people, to be a family member, to, I think all of those things are at play. And like you say, when she realizes that she is disposable, that, even though he says, I can't, there's such a great moment where he's got her head on his shoulder and he says, I will not lose you. And you can just see, and of course he's never going to, do a very obvious close up, which I also love. I love his frames, letting things play out. And you can see her eyes start around and sort of go, it does. It's like, it feels like the collar tightening. It really does. Yeah. Yeah, it's a special film. It remains a special film when I rewatch. And I loved The Nest, and I'm so excited that he's been working on the projects that he's been, but I feel, similarly, when I still love The Witch, I go back and I watch Eggers' first film and I go, oh, and he's famously said in interviews that he doesn't like that film. And I just go, there's something so special about some of these first features that it's just, they never lose their shine for me.
Yeah. It's the big swing, right? Like it's the chance that you get. You might not ever make another one, so you pack everything in. I think that's why some filmmakers do distance themselves a little, because they're embarrassed at how honest they are and how much of themselves they put into it. And they won't see it that way, but Eggers is such an intellectualizer. Yeah. Right? Like The Witch is about isolation and panic. Yeah. And I think he hasn't made another movie that goes there. Mm-hmm. He's very deliberately chosen stories that aren't as emotional in order to be absurd or distant or mythological. And The Witch is just like, all we have are people's faces. We don't have the money to do anything else.
Totally. Yeah. It's very immediate. It's very immediate and urgent. And like you said, it's very panic driven. And I feel, it's quite stressful. And like you said, it is very earnest. And I think I respond to that earnest quality. Like I just go, great, lay it on me. But you're right, he is quite an intellectualizer, and I love his films. I really appreciate the kind of filmmaker he is, but I've never heard it put that way. And I think you're spot on. Yeah,
very possibly, yeah. And with Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene, Durkin's just pushing concepts. I think he just overstuffs it compared to his other movies, which are very, very spare and understated.
Yeah.
And overstuffs is wrong because I don't think there is anything in here that doesn't belong, but it's just there's so much swirling around emotionally as opposed to the sort of the level of control that's in his other films.
Yes. Yes. And it's interesting because I think there's this quality that you're talking about, and yet restraint. I think there's such restraint in the filmmaking.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And that's why I respond to it so much, because I'm sure you know the Turkish director. Is it Seylan? I love his films, and I feel, I don't think they're similar films at all, but like there's just something that like gets tipped really nicely in the back of my brain somewhere in a similar way to when I watch Sean Durkin's work.
Well,
Yeah.
that's interesting. When I
Yeah.
think of Ceylon, I think of the landscape. I think of the big empty spaces,
Yeah.
devoid of humanity,
Yeah.
but with people just pushing through, trying to get to from one side of this, literally from one side of the screen to the other before something terrible happens. And I think
Yes.
Durkin's films are about those people too.
Yeah, yeah, and I think even if it's not a really large spare landscape, I think there's just, I think of that house in the nest, house, quote unquote
Yeah.
house, and I think there's something about you. There's just something that translates for me in terms of like, what's going to happen here, and like you said, these people just pushing through it, but that there's just something inherently ominous. I don't know. It's great.
Yeah, I think we talked about it at the time with the nest, with like those weird tracking shots that just get closer and closer. There's nothing's happening, but the malice in
Oh
in
my
the
god.
in the focus wheel almost. They're like you can feel something closing in on them, and it's just the camera, but it's incredibly unsettling.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. I'm very proud of Sweetland. I mean, I think Christian Sparks is such a great director. This other film that I have coming out this week as well, that there are moments, and that book, I mean, I could talk for too long about it because I'd read the book like 7 times before I ever became involved with the film, and it's my favorite book, and I grew up in Newfoundland, and I was very excited because there were moments in the film that are also mundane that really frightened me. And I've never had, I've never really kind of had that experience in watching a film that I was a part of and just going, especially loving the book. Oh my God, he is like checking the thing in my brain that was checked when I was reading it that I found scary or really unsettling. And it's, again, it lives in that same sort of like, this doesn't need to, even though it does sort of become a bit of a ghost story in some senses, but there are things about that book and that film that I just go, this is not meant to reach out and really grab me, and it is. And I just love that. I love experiencing that in film.
Oh man, I love those connections. I love it when the movie gets you and won't let go of you. Even you get up and leave, and what is this now? 13 years later, Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene is still following me around.
Exactly. That's how I feel as well. Exactly.
Oh, that's wonderful. And the way we close the podcast is always the same after 500 episodes, incredibly enough.
I know. Congratulations. That's
Thank
amazing.
you. I'm glad you could do it. For this episode, it's just great to sort of bring everything back together. Jonas did one, Sean did one in the early days, and now here we all are.
Mm-hmm.
You get to bring the burning season in and unite it all. Christian did one too. I recommend people listen to all of them. And I was going to ask the same question I asked of them, which is, is there anything of the film you chose? Is there anything of Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene that you've referenced or borrowed or outright stolen? I was trying to figure out if there's something in the burning season, because it is somebody with a secret, but it's sort of a different structural secret that I don't really see the connection. But if there is one, I mean, have you lifted something? Are you planning to, now that you're writing and planning to direct? Is something influential?
Oh my gosh! I have pitch decks with the poster. I have 2 pitch decks with the Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene poster for sure. Just in terms of how I think how it handles a psychological journey. I'm very interested in the inner workings of, like really letting that play out in a film, and I think it just plays out, as we've been effusively talking about, so impeccably in this film. And I think probably without, probably in a subconscious way, even like there's some real significant trauma at play in the burning season. In fact, when I first read the script, it was a different draft. Like the thing that happens was not in the draft. And I did a chemistry read with Jonas and got the role, and then was very excited. And then they sent me the draft as the film exists now. And I think I responded saying like, oh shit, guys, wow. And I was excited about that but I was so interested in these characters just as they existed that I said in an interview once, I didn't even need an event, but the event cements it even more of like, okay, wow, this is a very specific bond. And it was really fun to dig into that. And I had a moment with Sean. Sean's such a great director. And I had a moment with him where we were watching the thing burn and knowing the implications of that. And I said, I don't know if I've gotten any of this right. Like I'd shot all of my scenes. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know if I got anything right, Sean. And he said, you did. You absolutely did. Because I love films that look at why. Like, why is this person getting through life in this way? And what are our defense mechanisms? And what is our dark sense of humor? And what is our survivalist mechanism, and he said all of that's there. So I think, very, very different from Martha, obviously, but someone who's never really faced like, okay, there needs to be some transformation from this traumatic event, and trying to play that person like bumbling through the world for a longer period of time than in Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene for years, and like doing it quite poorly at moments, but getting by. So there's a bit of a connection there, I suppose.
My thanks to Sara Canning, who you can see opposite Jonas Chernick in Sean Garrity's nifty new drama The Burning Season, which opens at the Varsity Cinemas in Toronto this Friday, May 10th. And you can also see Sara in Christian Sparks' Sweetland, which is rolling out to theaters across Canada all month. It opens in Vancouver and Toronto next Friday, May 17th. Thanks also to Angie Power. She knows what she did. You can find Sara on Instagram at Sara Canning, all one word, and you can find Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene on Blu-ray and DVD from Walt Disney Home Entertainment. It's also streaming on Disney Plus in Canada and available to rent or buy on various VOD services across North America. You can find me on Blue Sky at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. If you're feeling nostalgic, the first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 44 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get the new booster when you can. And thanks for listening to however many of these 500 episodes you've heard. I hope you enjoyed them. I definitely have. I'll see you next week.